The bar was a dimly lit, smoky joint on the edge of a quiet town. It wasn't exactly the kind of place you'd call welcoming. The jukebox played an old country tune, and the low murmur of gruff voices filled the room. Leather jackets with patches lined the backs of every chair, their owners sipping beer or laughing loudly over old stories. When the door swung open, the air seemed to shift. Heads turned as a young black soldier stepped inside, his uniform crisp, his boots clean enough to reflect the neon lights. He walked with quiet confidence, but it was clear he wasn't the kind of customer this bar was used to seeing. The bartender, a heavy-set woman with a cigarette tucked behind her ear, gave him a sharp look. "You lost, soldier?" "No, ma'am," he said evenly. "Just here for a drink." He made his way to the bar, but he could feel the eyes on him, especially from the table of bikers near the back. There were 5 of them, their leather vests covered in patches, some with American flags, others with skulls and eagles. The biggest one, a bald man with a gray beard and deep-set eyes, leaned back in his chair, watching him closely. "You sure you're in the right place, boy?" the man called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. The soldier paused, his jaw tightening. "Pretty sure I can sit anywhere I want," he replied, keeping his voice calm but firm. The bar went quiet for a moment. The bikers exchanged looks, smirking like they knew what was about to happen next. The bald man, clearly the leader, stood up and walked toward the soldier, his boots thudding against the floor. "You've got some nerve, walking in here like you own the place," he said, stopping a few feet away. The soldier turned to face him. "Just here for a drink," he said again, his voice steady. "Yeah?" the biker growled. "Well, maybe you ought to take your drink somewhere else. This here's a real American bar, for people who've earned their place." The words hung heavy in the air, the meaning behind them as clear as day. The soldier's eyes narrowed, but he didn't back down. "I've earned my place," he said, his voice low but sharp. "Served my country, same as anyone else." The biker chuckled, shaking his head. "Yeah, sure. But guys like you don't get it. You don't know what real sacrifice looks like." At that, the soldier's face hardened. "Don't I?" The biker leader leaned in closer, his voice dripping with mockery. "You come in here, flashing that uniform, acting like you're better than us. You've got no idea what this country's really about." The soldier stared at him for a long moment. Then, without a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out an old, worn photograph. He unfolded it carefully and held it up for the biker to see. "Recognize anyone?" the soldier asked. The biker's smirk faded as his eyes locked onto the photo. It showed a group of soldiers, young and full of life, posing in front of a Humvee. The biker's face went pale as he recognized one of the men in the photo, himself, decades younger. "Where'd you get this?" the biker asked, his voice suddenly quieter. The soldier pointed to another man in the photo, one standing beside the biker with a proud smile. "That's my father," he said. "You served with him, didn't you?" The bar fell silent. Even the other bikers looked uneasy, their confidence suddenly shaken. The biker leader took the photo from the soldier, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at it for a long moment before nodding. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, I knew him. He was a good man." The soldier's jaw tightened. "He never came home. My mom always told me he died a hero, but she didn't have the details. I've spent my whole life wondering what happened to him. Then I found this photo, and your name on the back." The biker sighed, running a hand over his beard. "Your dad," he paused, as if the words were too heavy to say out loud. "He saved my life. Took a sniper's bullet that was meant for me. If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be standing here." The soldier's breath caught. He had always imagined his father's death as some distant tragedy, but hearing it like this, so personal, was almost too much to bear. "Why didn't you ever reach out?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell us?" The biker looked down, shame flickering across his face. "What was I supposed to say? That your dad died because I wasn't quick enough? That I owed him everything and couldn't even look his family in the eye? I didn't think you'd want to hear from someone like me." The soldier stepped closer, his expression softening. "You think we didn't want to know? My mom spent years crying herself to sleep, wondering if his death meant something. And I grew up not even knowing what kind of man he was. You had the answers, and you stayed silent. The biker leader looked at him, his tough exterior cracking. I'm sorry, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, the room was still. Then, to everyone's surprise, the soldier held out his hand. Thank you, he said simply. The biker stared at him, stunned. For what? For telling me the truth, the soldier replied. For finally letting me know who my father was. The biker hesitated, then took the soldier's hand. It was a small gesture, but in that moment, it carried the weight of years of guilt, grief, and unspoken respect. The other bikers watched silently as their leader and the soldier sat down together at the bar. The bartender poured them both a drink, her sharp demeanor softening. Looks like you two got a lot to talk about, she said. They spent the next hour swapping stories about the soldier's father, about the war, about the lives they had both lived since then. The tension in the room melted away, replaced by a quiet sense of understanding. As the soldier finally stood to leave, the biker leader stopped him. Hey, he said, your dad. He'd be proud of you. The soldier nodded, a faint smile on his face. Thanks, he said, and for what it's worth, I think he'd be proud of you too. The biker watched as the young man walked out, his footsteps echoing softly in the quiet bar. For the first time in years, he felt a little lighter, like a weight he'd been carrying for too long had finally been lifted. That night, the soldier left with more than just answers. He left with a sense of closure he hadn't thought possible. And in the bar, a group of men who once saw him as an outsider now saw him as something else. A connection to the past and a reminder of the sacrifices that truly mattered. After hearing this incredible story, how would you have handled such a tense moment in a place where you're clearly not welcome? Let me know your thoughts below. If this story moved you or made you think differently about courage, sacrifice, and unexpected connections, don't just leave. Act, please. Share this video, spark a conversation, and remind the world that heroes come in all forms, even when they're misunderstood.